away. Nick Buchert says no baskets, and Draymond touched it in the cylinder. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
After review, the basket interference call on the court has been overturned to a successful basket. The rim touch by Green does not cause the ball to take an unnatural bounce. The game clock will be set at .2.
Yeah, game reset to .2. Basket counts. And the Warriors walk out of Oklahoma City with their 5th consecutive win as we welcome you inside Warriors this week here on 95.7 The Game. It's John Dickinson. Pleasure to be joined by Dan Devone here on a Saturday for the next 3 hours. And we'll open up the phone lines right off the top. 888-957-9570. You can give us a call or shoot us a text at that number. Dan, good to be with you, my man. Been a little bit, but the Warriors have got things rolling here. 5 consecutive wins, and I think these last 2 wins by a single point on Wednesday against the Kings and last night, both of them with 0.2 of a second to go, I think indicative of the fact that this year ain't last year when it comes to close games and down-the-stretch execution and hell, maybe even a little bit of luck as far as winning some of these games.
JD, how are you? Always good to be alongside, and I would also add to that certainly when it comes to not only close games but playing on the road. This team doesn't resemble anything that we saw of a year ago. They're now undefeated on the road, 4-0. They've nearly won about half as many games as they won all of last year, and we're 6 games into it. So yeah, this is clearly a different squad.
No doubt. And I think when you look at it, and I had the note, it was, when they got their 3rd win last year on the road, it was the week of Christmas when they were able to do that, and they were 3-14 at that particular point in time. Yeah, 11 total road wins last year. They're already up to 4-0, 5-1 overall, and they're speaking about the difference in the locker room, the difference between Chris Paul. We're going to get into that here in the next 3 hours, but I mean, to me, you got to start with Stephen Curry. Stephen Curry has just been fantastic to begin this season. And last night they put the ball in his hands just like any other team would put the ball in their superstars' hands, clear it out, let 30 go to work, and 30 delivered a couple of nights after the Warriors ran a real smart play when the Kings tried to take the ball out of Curry's hands. They stayed poised. I mean, that's been the big thing to me in the close games over these last 2. The Warriors have done it in 2 different ways, right? They won yesterday basically with offense. It was a defense optional, get up and down the floor, run and gun kind of a game against a young and really talented Oklahoma City team. But then they were able to win a grimy one against the Kings on a night where De'Aaron Fox didn't play and nobody could hit a shot. And it seemed like they really didn't have their legs beneath them coming off of the prior 3-game road trip where they had just swept. So doing it in different ways, I think, impressive for this Warriors team to this point through 6 games.
Yeah, and people referred to last night's game as a trap game. I think without SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, their best player, one of the up-and-coming stars in the league, unavailable. You're just coming off of that, that emotional win against Sacramento. Maybe you're overlooking OKC despite them being, as you mentioned, one of the young, talented teams in the league. But this is a testament to who the Warriors are this year. Their defense was not good. They didn't play well for a half as far as turnovers, which has been a point of emphasis this year. They want to keep that around 13. They had about 10 at half. So this was not a well-played game, and it was a track meet, not to mention that OKC could not miss, especially Lou Dort have a night. But Golden State, down the end, withstood the blow, and you just had that sense that, okay, they're not going to shoot like this for an entire 48 minutes. You just took their best shot. You got a standing 8 count, and you're still within striking distance. So that game just had the composition of, you know what, Oklahoma, you had your opportunity to run away and hide, and now it's the 4th quarter, and this is usually when the Warriors and their guile and that veteran leadership, although we didn't see it last year, but the structure and the attitude is clearly different this year, and the Warriors just said, we're going to walk you down. You had your opportunity to take your shot and knock us out, but we're still here, and as long as we're within striking distance, give the ball to Steph, clear aside, and let's go home.
Yeah, the Warriors hit 13 threes in the first half. It looked like that was going to be, that kept them in the game I made the point at halftime, if the Warriors cool off, as hot as Oklahoma City was, but if the Warriors cool off from three, they may wind up being in trouble. It looked in the third quarter as if the Warriors were going to be in trouble. They cooled off a little bit initially. The Thunder were putting their head down and just attacking the basket with their athleticism and really having their way, getting into the paint against the Warriors. And it looked as if, all right, this is trouble for Golden State. But they were able to, Moses Moody hits a big bucket. Jonathan Kaminga, didn't finish the game last night, had a pretty bad first half. But he had a lot of key buckets in the second half that I thought stabilized the game when the Warriors really needed points, when Oklahoma City was running wild there toward the back end of the third quarter to help keep the Warriors in it. And the third quarter wasn't a disaster. Yes, the 39 points allowed can be construed as a disaster, but the Warriors wound up putting up 37 themselves. And to me, when the game was tied going to the fourth quarter, as much, Dan, as they didn't win, and it felt like they never won that last night's game a year ago on the road, this year is different, and they were able to do enough down the stretch. Gary Payton II defensively, making a couple of big stops. The Warriors did get stout enough in the final 4 minutes as the game really bogged down to a complete slog with a lot of replay reviews and half-court offense, and it was almost in some ways two different games, right? It was the up and down, defense optional, and then you hit the 4-minute mark basically with the game close, and it became a defensive battle. It became a battle of wills, I think, in some ways, with a lot of different replay review. It felt like Draymond Green was involved in all the replay reviews last night. You get the one at the end. And so the Warriors able to get out of there with a win, which, again, is something that they weren't able to do a year ago. I know Steve Kerr in the post-game press conference addressing the fact that, and this is really the second time in a week that he's done this, Dan, where any kind of question about last year, he just wants it completely thrown out. He don't want to mention last year. Last year was different. I know we'll get into the comments from Draymond Green about the work environment and all of that from post-game on Wednesday. And, Draymond obviously has to be accountable, I think, for part of why things were the way that they were last year. But this team seems to like each other more and the pieces fit together more, and it's allowing them the margin for error for when things are not perfect, and things were hardly perfect last night. They definitely were not perfect Wednesday, but they're still able to figure out ways to win games, and that's what championship contending teams do.
Yeah, and listen, I've always maintained that what happens in that locker room, it has a direct correlation and a cause and effect in wins and losses in what happens on the court. And we saw a year ago that clearly there was disharmony. And the one thing that the Warriors have always got right, starting at the very top with Bob Myers and Steve Kerr, that there's a buy-in. And when your poster child and your best player is Steph Curry, he leads the way, not only with the remarkable talent, but it's the attitude, and everybody sort of falls in line. Now, look, I don't want to mention this guy's name because I went after him a year ago, and I know the callers would go after me because he was enjoying, he'd have big nights, but I never felt that Jordan Poole fit on this basketball team. And the reason why, and listen, God bless, do you out in Washington, you belong in Washington. They don't play defense and score 30 a night. But there was something amiss with this guy, and the one thing that I mentioned was that it wasn't necessarily, and we could talk about the punch, but it's the fact, and listen, I don't want to defend Draymond. For you kids listening, keep your hands in your pockets. Don't punch anybody. But there's a reason why he got decked. There's a reason why Steph Curry, of all people, took out the mouthpiece and threw it away because Jordan Poole didn't give him the ball in the closing minutes of a game. There's a reason why Steve Kerr, who never does this, dressed down one Jordan Poole in a game, basically went Bobby Knight on the guy. You never see that. I think behind the scenes, he just was a bit disruptive, and it had to do with the personality. I think he pushed buttons, and I think just with that one guy out of the room, and you replace him, of course, with the likes of a Chris Paul and a couple of kids, and the buy-in is there. And just that cancer now that is gone, you can see that it is back intact in terms of that locker room, in terms of guys getting along. I can't remember a Golden State Warrior team that refers to the team, and I mean, the complete roster, how these guys are all and I'm talking about the two kids, Brandon Pajemski as well as Trace Jackson Davis. They didn't play last night. Did you hear this, though? Draymond Green said, we needed those guys. They weren't there in the road trip because Steve Kerr reassigned them to Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is starting their season. He said, want to get you guys some run, get in some scrimmages. You're going to go through some practices. You're not in our rotation right now. So he does this, right? He did this with Moses Moody, did with Jonathan Kaminga. He does it with rookies. If you're not in the rotation, rather than sit on the bench, I want you playing. Draymond said, I needed those guys out in OKC. We feed off of their energy. Draymond's howling at the moon that he's putting his arms around this team and saying, I like this team behind closed doors, and that oftentimes, to me, means as much as anything else.
Well, they seem like they're on a mission, to be honest, compared to where things were last year, and maybe coming off the championship as well. That creates a little bit of that hangover. The punch, obviously, a year ago created, I think, issues that this team was never able to overcome. I think Jordan Poole wanting to be a particular player and have a certain role and almost be considered to be someone above reproach, like the other three, future Hall of Famers and guys that have won 4 championships. I think that was something that was grating, as wrong as what Draymond Green did. And look, we don't want to spend the next 3 hours relitigating Jordan Poole and all of that. Although, Draymond Green, his comments in the post-game press conference on Wednesday after the win against Sacramento, when he said it was hard to come to work and that the chemistry was horse bleep and all of that, it did make you wonder. And I know we debated it on this radio station throughout the day on Thursday, and Steve Kerr was asked about it. And we'll hear all the sound here as far as what Draymond had to say and how Steve Kerr responded to it. And Kerr called it unfair to single out Jordan Poole. And look, Draymond didn't single out Jordan Poole by name, but it left everybody wondering the only thing really that's different about this team is Chris Paul's on the team and Jordan Poole's not on the team. Now, I think that's a little overly simplistic. Dario Saric was a huge component and key to the win last night, scored 20 points. Kaminga and Moody were obviously here last year. Trace Jackson Davis and Pajemski were not. They got sent down to the G League for last night's game as well. So it's not completely the same team, but mostly the core is the same guys. And look, Kaminga looks like a different guy in terms of his attitude, his willingness to be coachable. That's something that's been singled out. And I wonder, again, not to try and put this all on Jordan Poole, but I wonder if maybe Poole was a little bit of a bad influence on a young player in Kaminga who has a high opinion of his own game and really at times looked like a guy that wanted to, put it on the deck and attack and be an offense-only player and try to look the part of being a future star as opposed to looking the part of being a role player that can help this team win based on the skill set that he possesses. And, maybe he was looking to Jordan Poole as a young kind of made dude leader, and he was starting to act the wrong way last year because, make no mistake, Steph Curry was talking about Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kaminga in the reported speech before they got on the bus and headed to Sacramento when Curry went off for 50 and they knocked the Kings out in Game 7. Those were the two players that about getting on board and needing to be a part of the team. I think Dante DiVincenzo may have been part of that as well. He's obviously not around anymore. And so the chemistry is definitely different, but Draymond's comments, I think, left everybody wondering, well, he's got to be talking about Jordan Poole, right?
Oh, there's no doubt. And I wouldn't be surprised if this escalates and it gets to the point where, Jordan Poole as well as Draymond Green are trading verbal darts. I mean, that's good theater, but it's neither here nor there. And just to move on and talking about Draymond for a second, he was so huge last night. And it's one of those things, you look at the box, I mean, he had 5 rebounds, 3 assists, the 15 points were nice. But, and it's Draymond, right? It's one of those love-hate towards the end of the game because he's right on the precipice of potentially getting a T. But he takes that blocking foul on Chet Holmgren, and they go down, and everybody's in Draymond's face. They're in OKC, and, Draymond, as you well pointed out, he's right in the middle of everything in the closing moments. But then right after that, You got about 25 seconds left in the game. Draymond gives you that fake handoff, and without a blink of an eye, darts to the paint and then throws that lob to GP2 to give the Warriors the lead again. And even the offensive interference towards the end of the game, which, I like to break down that game with you, that play, JD. I don't put that, even if that bucket's ruled off and they go into OT and say they lose to Oklahoma, I don't put that on Draymond. I think that was just an active play on a ball that, with the gentle touch and as high as Steph had to put that off the window, there was some uncertainty as to whether that was going to settle through the rim or not. I don't put that on Draymond. I think Draymond was vintage Draymond Green towards the end of that game. And, he, along with Wiggins, you can see them just getting their sea legs, getting their stamina. And I heard Chris Paul talk about this last night, that while guys get back into shape, they're still far, far from playing their best basketball because of the new faces and the fact that they still do not know, a lot of the guys, what they're doing defensively. A lot of things are being put in late. And so, this thing could get even better for the Golden State Warriors as far as the familiarity is concerned.
888-957-9570, 888-957-9570. It's John Dickinson and Dan Devone. It's Warriors This Week here on a Saturday at 95.7 The Game. We're off and running here in the 9 o'clock hour. We're going to be with you until noon here on 95.7 The Game as the Warriors improve to 5-1. They're 4-0 on the road. They beat the Thunder 141-139 on to Cleveland and then Detroit before a stop in Denver. And the Warriors, a lot of road games to begin, 7 of the first 9 away from Chase Center. Dubs not back home until a week from tonight when they will take on Cleveland again. Of course, you can hear all of these games right here on 95.7 The Game. Let's get into that last play. Brilliant drive by Steph Curry. Initially ruled offensive basket interference with Draymond Green grabbing the rim. And I'll be honest, initially I thought right call on the court, not going to count. Draymond grabs the rim. I know Josh Giddey had grabbed the net. People were freaking out about the fact that Giddey had grabbed the net. But then when you look at it and you read the rule, and the rule applies both ways, Dan, as you know, applies to the offensive player can grab the rim as long as he doesn't affect the ball going through the basket. And obviously the offensive player cannot touch the ball when it's over the cylinder. So upon review, and I'll have the quote from the official in the postgame press conference, he did a pool report with a reporter from the Oklahoma area where he clarified exactly what was reviewed and what ultimately determined the call. And it was twofold. Giddey grabbing the net, it's the same thing. Giddey grabbing the net, if it doesn't impact the ball going through, that can be discounted. And what essentially happened was, hey, Draymond didn't affect the shot. Giddey didn't affect the shot. It was a wash. Basket counts. Game over. Again, I think once you slowed it down, fair result, all things considered. But I'll be honest, I thought in the moment, it wasn't going to be a lock that thing was going to get overturned because the call on the floor was as it was, offensive basket interference. And once they go to replay, it almost becomes a coin flip. So I deemed it a break, even though I do think it was the proper result and the right call. I still think it was a break once they went to replay with the basket not counting, that the Warriors were able to get that bucket counted and walk out of there a winner.
Yeah, I thought that if you touch any part of the rim, that immediately it's offensive interference. And upon reading the rule, it gets a little subjective. I think anybody watching the game could recognize that thing was going through the hoop, right? So
yes,
and that's the bottom line, right? Let Steph Curry and the players decide who wins and loses these things. But just stepping away from the officiating of that last call for a second, we sort of take these things for granted. But that by Steph Curry, for
awesome.
Crying out loud. I mean, you talked about this off the top. The last time they were in this situation, tremendous move by Steve Kerr against Sacramento, closing seconds. Don't call the timeout because the Warriors know what it is that they're going to do. They've been down this road. It's a veteran core, right? Sacramento's scrambling, and maybe Coach Brown told them, let's take the ball out of Steph's hands, but there was no timeout. They go after Steph. Warriors, all right. You go to Draymond. Draymond facilitates. The minute the ball goes to Draymond, you don't have to coach this up with X's and O's. There's Clay who knows immediately that I'm going to cut and get to my spot, catch, release, the narrowest of margins because Sabonis almost got that shot from behind, but boom, game winner, Warriors win it. This time, the Warriors sit there with Steph out on the angle, and they're waiting. All right, what are you going to do? Are you going to – you know what the Warriors are doing. The Warriors are just saying, you're out there by yourself, Steph, because the last thing Golden State does is bring somebody over to set a screen. No, because that means you bring in a defender, and they can jump with a double – with two players in the double team. So they sit there and they see that, okay, it's just me and you, Lou Dort. All right, Warriors like this. So he shakes Lou Dort. And now it's him and Chet Holmgren between him and the game winner. Holmgren goes full-on extension at 7-1, 7-2. And we just take this for granted. That shot that he floated over the outstretched arms of Chet Holmgren to kiss off the very top of the window and have that thing settle through. I know we get accustomed to the step-back three for a winner or a jump shot, but that to me was at the very top of all the dramatic finishes we've seen by number 30 throughout the years.
Without question. And you look at the game winners that he's had throughout the years, and that was the first game winner since 2022 for Steph in the final 5 seconds of a game. He had the win against Houston. And yeah, I mean, it's impressive stuff. The 9th career game-winning shot, Devone, for Steph Curry with 5 seconds or less. Again, the last one back in January of 2022. That was the first actual buzzer beater with the clock at 0. But it was a hell of a move in a situation where the Warriors said, all right, Steph, and this is what you see teams do. They put the ball in their best player's hands, and you're either going to win it or the game's going to go to overtime. There isn't going to be anything else in there that's going to clutter it up, like you said, like a screener or too much ball movement. It's basically going to be Steph makes a play. Maybe he ends up making a pass if the defense tries to collapse on him and somebody else gets an open shot. But it was going to be very, very easy. And for Steph to get by Dort, who is a terrific defender, and yeah, the floater game and the ability of Steph. How many games has Steph Curry won for the Warriors in the last 2.5 years based on his ability to get to the basket? We always talk about paint points, and the Warriors sometimes are lacking in paint points, and they're 2-3-point dependent, and they don't have enough guys who can get a tough two. The guy on their team that's getting the tough two more often than not, and the others contributed last night, but the guys that are getting the tough twos more often than not, it's Steph. And his ability to get into the paint, I think it's an underrated part of his game that's really evolved as he's gotten older to be a significant part of his game because teams are so hell-bent on trying to get him off of the three-point line in certain key situations. He's using that to his advantage and to the Warriors' advantage.
And I think it aligns with the work he's put in as far as the strength and training. He couldn't play through that sort of contact, I think, as a younger player. Now he welcomes the contact and getting to the rim. I would say this, and I don't have the statistics in front of me, and I don't even know if there are metrics for this, but he has to be one of the greatest finishers in the history of this game. And maybe it's a little bit more notable because he's a guard and he's smaller. But usually, and this is sort of one of those gut feelings, that when he's going to the rim, you have a good sense that this is either a bucket or a foul. Because Steph just has a way of closing deals. And what we've seen throughout the years where he, as well as the Warriors, were so three reliant, and now because I think a lot of the upper body strength, but his game it's multidimensional. If you want to just run him off the three-point line, that's fine. But as he demonstrated last night, he'll get to the basket as effective as anybody in the league right now.
And just tying up the loose end on the final play, I did want to get to the quote from the official, as it was Mitchell Irvin, the crew chief, last night in Oklahoma City. There was a reporter from the Oklahoman who did the pool report. Anytime there's any kind of controversy at the end of a game or a big play involving the officials, They'll send a pool reporter into the officials' locker room, and they'll get to ask a couple of questions for clarification purposes to the crew chief. And so Mitchell Irvin was asked about the overturn, and the question was, please explain why Draymond Green wasn't called for offensive interference, why the call was overturned. And Mitchell Irvin, here's the quote, it was clear and conclusive evidence that Draymond does not touch the ball. Although Draymond does touch the rim, he does not touch the ball, nor does him touching the rim cause the ball to take an unnatural bounce. Therefore, a basketball violation does not occur on the play, and thus the basket counts there. There was no mention of Giddey, and I know there were people who were going crazy, and maybe had the call not been overturned upon review, people would really be going crazy if the Warriors had lost the game about Giddey, but they deemed on the floor that Giddey grabbing the net had no impact. And I know there were people that were reporting Giddey, and I think on the NBC Bay Area telecast, I think they were talking about Giddey. That actually didn't factor into the call whatsoever. And it didn't matter, again, proper result. Maybe it's semantics here, but what was reviewed, and people were kind of coming after me on Twitter last night, what was reviewed was Draymond in this instance. And again, they got the call right, Dan, but it came down to, yes, he can touch the rim as long as it didn't impact the shot. It didn't impact the shot, which, as you laid out, was clearly going in the bucket. Yeah,
and that's what the rules state. And so they were just abiding by what it is, the law that, as it relates to, these sort of things. I was sort of naive because I always, again, felt that if you got any part of the rim while it's a live ball around the cylinder, it's waved off. So I think that clearly you could see it's going to be a bucket. And the last thing you want is for a referee to get letter of the law and make a decision that decides the outcome of that contest. Again, maybe we can talk about this coming back on the other side, but I had no issues, and I'd like to get your opinion, what you thought about Draymond Green getting a piece of the rim and what potentially could have destroyed and ruined one of the greatest finishes in recent Warrior memory, and certainly one of the best finishes we've seen by Steph Curry. But I don't know if we have enough time to do that now, but I had no issue with Draymond Green and his activity around the hoop towards the end of that contest.
Yeah, we'll get into that coming back. We do have Dawn as well on the phones, and we'll get to 888-957-9570. But we will pause here. He's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. It's Warriors This Week. We're off and running here on a Saturday on 95.7 The Game.
At Lawton Skilled Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, we know how hard it is to care for loved ones. Come and check out the 5-star facility named one of the top skilled nursing facilities by U.S. News and World Report. Visit us at LifeGen.
refers to Shea Flores, the official, with the explanation that Draymond relayed there in his post-game press conference. I read to you the Mitchell Irvin crew chief from last night, what he had to say as far as the call. And the bottom line is, I think it was the proper outcome considering the play, regardless of whether Draymond impacted this or Giddey impacted that with the net. We welcome you back here to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game. It's John Dickinson and Dan Devone. We'll get to the phones in just a second, Dan, but did want to just go back and forth a little bit on what you had mentioned before the break. I thought Draymond explained it pretty well there. I thought really it was incidental on both ends as far as, Draymond going up, obviously trying to make a play, get a tip if the ball does come out. But I think him being tangled up with Giddey and those two being tangled up together, I think led to both Draymond hitting the rim and Giddey hitting the net. So, again, the explanation, while there was the confusion initially, I think it wound up being no harm, no foul either way. And again, the most important thing, as we've talked about a lot here, is the Curry made the move, beat his man, and hit the shot. And that shot had every right to count in that particular instance.
Yeah, you would hate for that thing to get ruled off, or upon further review, they come back with an offensive interference call. And so you don't get what is, I think, the greatest finish by Steph Curry and what has been obviously a remarkable career. But I just wanted to highlight Draymond for what I thought, again, even if they decide that the bucket's no good and that thing goes into overtime and people want to point a finger at Draymond for losing the contest, I think instinctively Draymond, as well as anybody in the front court, that's what you got to do. We saw a lot of the Warriors being active on the glass by Andrew Wiggins, tipping and keeping balls alive. But when that thing is so high off the window, and I'm talking about Steph's game winner last night over Chet Holmgren, that thing is sort of tantalizingly bouncing on the rim, and there's some unpredictability as far as whether that thing is going to stay down or come out. So I can understand fully what it is that Draymond was doing as far as a putback, because this is it. It's the game winner. So, again, I don't know if anyone wanted to lay blame on Draymond at the time. I know it's frustrating because, you've just taken away a potential game winner from Steph Curry, but I thoroughly understand and defend Draymond in terms of his actions.
Well, and I don't think anybody was going to be blaming Draymond last night. I really don't. And maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm naive in this instance. But I feel like if anything, people were going to go scream bloody murder about the officiating. Oh. And to me, that would be the conversation. And again, in the explanation where they say Giddey grabbing the net didn't matter, if they also said Draymond touching the rim did matter, which I think was on the table at the moment in which they went to the replay review. And again, it's semantics, and a lot of people are like, well, why are you bringing it up still and this and that? But the officials deemed that Giddey grabbing the net didn't matter. So again, at the point in which they went to the replay, it was all about Draymond. And again, they got it right, which Warrior fans are happy about, and I think objective observers are happy about. But when that thing goes to replay, I just don't think people realize how much of a 50-50 coin flip it really is, especially when the call on the court went the other way and deemed that Draymond had interfered with it. Now, it was pretty clear that he didn't touch the ball, obviously, and it was clear, although subjective still, it was clear that it didn't impact the ball going through the basket. But again, anytime a guy touches the rim, the official can make the determination that it did impact the basket, whether it did or not. And so you still have to get it right, as much as we can all sit here, and I think those with Warriors-colored glasses would sit there and say, easy call, damn it, and Giddey grabbed the net, and Draymond isn't that. Again, they got it right. But I think people would have been talking about the officiating over Draymond making a blunder had it gone the other way.
Well, and with good reason, because, and I know we're not this show, we don't want to bottom feed and point fingers at officiating and bad calls, but there were some, and I don't want to dwell on this because it's easy to do, and let's not be those guys as like the officiating sucked, but some of those calls, and specifically, I think it was Jalen Williams, in the game hanging in the balance, closing moments of the contest, and he's trying to clear space. Did you see this on Klay Thompson? And he's literally banging his head against the chest of Klay Thompson, and Klay's just laterally moving with him, and they called a foul on Klay Thompson. And Steve Kerr's like, you got to be kidding me. And I was watching, and obviously I wasn't privy to what it is that they were saying, but the referee's like motioning to his eye. No, he's clutching his eye. Klay hurt his eye, and you could see Steve Kerr say, if you're going to bang your head against a guy's chest and trying to create space that isn't there, yeah, you're going to hurt your eye. It was just one of the most egregious calls, but let's move on. I don't want to be that guy. But when you talk about officiating, there were some, and I think it went both ways, but there were some head scratches last night.
All right, let's get to Don in Sunnyvale, 888-957-9570. First caller of the morning here on 95.7 The Game. Oh, we just lost Don. Well, Don, give us a call back. We'll get you right to the front of the line, and we'll get you on the air. We too busy, Devon, like we always do, man. You put the two of us together, and we just can't stop yapping. And so, we will get to the phone calls here between now and noon. Please feel free to join the conversation, 888-957-9570. Well, the other thing I wanted to get into, and again, thrilling win for the Warriors, 4-0 on the road, 5-1 overall. Cleveland tomorrow, Detroit Monday, Denver. That's going to be a big early season showdown in Denver on Wednesday night before the Warriors come home. But the big topic of the day, and I know there's been a lot of discussion, and with every win, Dan, it becomes this comparison to last season. And we mentioned it a little bit in the opening segment, but the Draymond Green comments post-game against Sacramento, and we're going to play a couple of the clips right here. I've got them lined up with Craig. Draymond, after the win against the Kings, just talking about, first of all, the chemistry this season after, at that point, 5 games already being better than last year. All right, so Draymond there, and I want to play the second part of this, Dan, before we react to what Draymond had to say. And I do think it's interesting because he's right. The chemistry had been phenomenal throughout the decade, basically, that the Warriors have been on top of the league and a championship contender. Last year it did get away, but it is interesting because it's a lot of the same guys in terms of the leaders and the superstar players, all of the same guys that were here a year ago, with the addition of Chris Paul and a couple of other veterans, and obviously the 2 rookies. Draymond, though, continued his answer here with a little more detail as far as how rough last year was. A group that likes being together. So your initial thoughts on that. My initial thought on the second part, just real briefly, was, well, Dre, like, I get it was different and it was hard, but you were a part of that, dude. Like, and again, I know Jordan Poole. I think I was the first one to say, hey, Jordan Poole does have a vibe that I could see the veteran players at times not being down with. And maybe being one of those guys. We all have that friend, Dan. We all do. We all have that friend who gets on your nerves, even though you love them and even though you're friends. But the way they come at you in certain situations about life, even if they're ribbing you, even if they're joking, you do maybe want to pop them one. And it doesn't mean you do by any stretch. I'm not saying that. But everybody has that friend. And so I feel like, Jordan became the guy that Draymond obviously he lost his cool with there. But I also think, hey, Draymond, like, you did make a mistake last year, a major one that helped set the course off path.
No doubt. And I think I got to give you some props here, JD, because I remember we did a show and it was in the aftermath and right after the punch and emotions were high. And just to take you back a little more than a year ago, let's not forget that the overall consensus was Draymond Green, get him out of town. Draymond Green is somebody that should have – some callers wanted him arrested Draymond Green was the Antichrist. He was public enemy number one. All right. It was pretty much 95 and that 5% that were like, no, you know what? Just everybody relax. And this isn't on Draymond. Now, I'm not defending Draymond, but I will say that you were one of the few, and you and I got into a conversation about it and you weren't, you didn't say, hey, listen, this is, he deserved this. Nobody deserves to get punched in the face. But you did sort of a highlight, and you were one of the few that said, this is a guy, and you were referring to Jordan Poole because nobody was taking that stance a year ago. Nobody would go anywhere near defending Draymond, and that's not what you were doing, but you did underline and highlight the fact that he was somebody that could push buttons. You mentioned how, the tongue sticking out after shots, sort of like maybe not teammates, but there's a way about this guy. And so before we all jump on Draymond and, publicly hang this guy, there was this sense of just let's understand who it is that we're dealing with here. Again, not to justify anybody punching somebody, but let's just remember that, and I think as the season bore on, and it wasn't just relegated, I think, to Draymond. I think that there were incidents, again, that provided insight. I mentioned Steph Curry going after Jordan Poole when he threw his mouthpiece and was upset with him visibly on the floor. Steve Kerr, I talked about this, dressing him down, chewing him out a la Bobby Knight. You don't see that from Steve Kerr. There was and don't forget, how about one of the assistant coaches in that ugly moment getting into it with Jordan Poole on the sidelines? And there were just these little windows that you got this idea that maybe this cat does not fit with what it is that has been so important to the Golden State Warriors throughout the years. And I hate when people throw this word out because it's so casual and it's overused, but the culture has been as important to anything. And I think that one guy was disruptive to what it is that the Golden State Warriors had built for so many years from the ground up.
Well, and the irony is Jordan Poole fit 2 years ago. And I know there's a lot of people that are saying, well, he helped him win a title. And he did. He helped him win a title. He started for Klay Thompson until Klay came back in January 2 years ago. He averaged 19 a game. He was efficient. I still think that's the best basketball that Jordan Poole's played in his career. The time that he started in the place of Klay Thompson 2 years ago as the Warriors got off to the 18-2 start. And hell, they were shortly after Klay came back, they were 41-13 before things kind of went awry down the stretch, and the Warriors were banged up, and they were trying to get everything back on the same page right as the playoffs started, and they were able to do it. Independent of the act itself, for me, Dan, because it was twofold. Draymond was wrong in the moment for what he did, but the other thing was, and this is where the conversation went, it went to, and you said it, well, who's got to go, right? Immediately it was, especially if this team doesn't win, and ultimately they did not win enough, and the chemistry and everything got worse. And so it became, who's got to go? And when and that was the no-brainer for me. It was like, there's no way, and that's where it became an easy conversation for me, is that there's no way you would say Draymond Green is the guy to go unless you want to admit right there, full stop, you're no longer contending for championships. And again, it wasn't necessarily about right or wrong in the moment, because Draymond was wrong. But Draymond could be wrong, and Jordan Poole being on the team could still be the wrong move, like moving forward. Like, just because you're wrong in the moment doesn't mean long term keeping you around isn't the right call for the franchise. And I think that's what made this thing such a struggle internally, was because as time moved on and everybody separated from it, it became clear that Draymond was the guy based on his play on the floor and based on Steph Curry's, going to bat for him, and Klay Thompson going to bat for him, and the big three going to bat for each other, and Steve Kerr going to bat for the big three. I mean, I'll never forget being down at the arena in L.A., Crypto.com Arena, formerly Staples, as the Warriors got eliminated back in May in Game 6. And it wasn't even 10 minutes after the game where Steve and Steph and Klay and Draymond we're running it back. we're running it back. We're coming back. We think this core can still do it. That was the ultimate indictment of Jordan Poole ain't going to be here to go Magic Johnson. I'm going to be here. He had the drop during his impromptu press conference when he was going to resign from the Lakers. And so I think, again, not to ramble about it, Draymond was in the wrong in that moment, but it was still in the right for him to be the player that the Warriors chose if one of them had to be chosen.
Yeah, I think once you got beyond that and it becomes a decision at the end of the season, just like anything else, what makes our team better going forward? Draymond Green still had more and still has more value physically to the Golden State Warriors than that of Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole can put up some big numbers, but Jordan Poole being as turnover prone as he was and remove everything else, the punch, when you're just looking at these two guys and you're trying to make the Golden State Warriors better. Well, listen, if Jokic is coming to town, who's going to D him up? There's one guy. There's one guy that provides the defense on that team and means more to them in terms of winning games and a cause and effect, and that is Draymond Green. Now, that may not be the case a year or two from now, but as of right now, where we live, 6 months ago when they made this decision, he has more value, and he outweighs that of Jordan Poole when you're talking about the positives and the negatives. And I know people will point to 2 years ago when he won an NBA championship, nobody had an issue with Jordan Poole. I would just push back, well, he's still a young guy. And I don't think that personality that I continue to harp on and beat this drum that it was never a fit with the Golden State Warriors, I just don't think he had fully grown into the sort of person or had become or at least fully displayed as to who he was. And we're also, he's a kid. We're all going through our formative years. And I would say a couple of years ago, he was not the same guy as far as the person that came to camp a year ago that eventually got punched by that of Draymond Green. So as it relates to those two, when you're making business decisions to make your team better, there's no doubt that Draymond Green's going to get the nod instead of Jordan Poole.
I think the success of 2 years ago in some ways went to Jordan Poole's head. And he came in a different dude, knowing that he was going to get paid, knowing that he was going to be a champion.
Agreed.
And I think that was a big part of it. I think Poole, he towed the line between brash and cocky and a showman. And again, when it's not grating on your own teammates, everybody loves it. Everybody in the Bay Warrior fans loved Jordan Poole's swag. 2 years ago, it didn't create situations where his teammates eye-rolled him because of it. And that's exactly what happened last year, I think, when he came back as a champ. He kind of came back, I thought, as, hey, I'm a made dude now. I'm a champ. I'm getting my 120 large, and I'm one of you guys. And I think that's where the disconnect really started, was the fact that I'm one of you guys. I'm like you, Steph. I'm like you, Clay. I'm like you, Draymond. And I think, the big three was like, yeah, you helped us. You were huge, but you got a long way to go before you're at our level in terms of, two-way play and championship commitment and all of those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I do think, Jordan, and you're right, he's young. Youth is an easy explainer. Money's an easy explainer. I think the 415 brings us up, and then we'll get to the phones on the Comcast Business text line. I think this is an excellent point from the text line. You guys are forgetting that the punch actually changed Poole's behavior. And I think that also is what occurred. Like, I think Poole came in a little different. I think the punch clearly changed things. Draymond has to be accountable for that, and it just set this awful tone that the Warriors set out to recover from going through this past spring and summer. And to this point, it appears they've been able to do it. And now, people are speaking out about some of the differences, which, we can get into that coming up in the next hour. Should Draymond be talking about Jordan without talking about Jordan, or hinting that it's Jordan and all of that? Does that potentially ruin the vibe after everybody has moved on as this team looks to get off to the hot start? We can get into that coming up as well. Let's get Scott in Berkeley here, though, before the top of the hour on Warriors This Week. Hey, Scott.
Hey, fellas. How you doing?
Doing well.
I guess the thing, I keep looking at everything, and we keep saying, yeah, it was an outlier year for the Warriors. I'm still mystified as to how Kerr couldn't manage it, given that when he was playing in Chicago, he famously swapped hands with MJ. That's always been mystifying to me about how the one person you would think of who could have managed a situation like that couldn't. But I've been saying for a while, you look at, the road record last year was just bizarre for this team, given the history. But by extension, you look at the whole thing. I mean, the Lakers getting to the finals, and I keep pointing this out. Memphis was a mess when the Lakers got them. The Warriors were a mess. They ended up, they get to Denver, which wasn't a mess, and we saw what happened. You look at the other conference, Miami got the benefit of some of the most egregious cases of coaching malpractice I've seen in probably 25 years. And I mean, it's kind of like we're looking at the first 10 days of the season, and I think we're maybe back on kind of I guess what I would call a more normal sort of pace and how we look at the season. So, I mean, and how last night was just fantastic, but I think what we've also seen the last two nights is that Holmgren and Wembanyama they're going to be miserable for people for the next 15 years. Oh my God.
Thanks, Scott. You're right about that. Dan, we can get into that as we kind of look around the first couple of weeks of the league. We will spend at least a half segment, if not a full segment, kind of doing that, early observations. Holmgren's nice. And Wembanyama, my God,
scary.
The game that he had against Phoenix the other night, just incredible stuff. All right, 1 hour in the books. We're flying along here. He's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. Phone lines are open, 888-957-9570. Comcast Business text line is open. We'll hear from Steve Kerr as he responded to what Draymond had to say when he joined Willard and Dibbs earlier this week here on 95.7 The Game. But we are off and rolling here. 2 more hours to come. Warriors this week, JD and Devone, 95.7 The Game.
Do you hear that? That's the sound of holiday joy at the Home Depot, where you can find everything you need to get ready for the holiday season, like all new...
couple of key stops. Not too many stops last night, Devone. But Gary Payton II did get one of them. And, I thought as you start to just look at last night's game, and then we'll get back into the conversation about Draymond and the chemistry and things being different from last year to this year. But I think when you go up and down the key contributors, Saric is 20, huge. Chris Paul's impact on the game for somebody that is 1 for 21 from 3 this year and didn't make a shot, but had 13 assists and 1 point and still to put a positive imprint on the game. Kaminga's buckets in the third quarter. Wiggins was more active. It was a good Klay Thompson shooting night. There were a lot of positives from a game where the Warriors didn't play a whole heck of a lot of defense except for the final couple of minutes. And Steve Kerr, I thought last night, made the right moves as far as the finishing lineup with Gary Payton II in that finishing lineup as well, and kind of going offense-defense a couple of times where he would put Kaminga and Wiggins in for Chris Paul and Steph Curry, and it just showing that the Warriors have a lot of different options down the stretch in a lot of these games. It was Paul and Gary Payton II who were the two finishers last night for the most part with Steph and Klay and Draymond.
Yeah, and that bench continues to be the storyline. They outscored Oklahoma City last night 57-37 as far as bench points. And as we try and find the reason for the success of this team, and there's a lot of things you can point at, certainly, and this is something that has been detailed throughout the early part of the season, but that bench is just, you couldn't, in your wildest dreams, if everything was to go perfect, this is exactly the scenario I think that Steve Kerr and the Warriors would have envisioned, a best-case scenario where Jonathan Kaminga provides you the athleticism, getting to the rim, Moody, the duo, gives you a sense of the guy can D up, give you threes, and Saric now beginning to warm into things, and then all led by that of Chris Paul. I think that what was interesting when you were given his stat line, he had only the 1 point, but the 13 assists, he's amongst the league leaders in assists. But the one thing that you have to highlight is that no turnovers. And as we talked about Jordan Poole now out of the building by Felicia, it's Chris Paul is now essentially the guy who has replaced Jordan Poole. If you recall, it was Jordan Poole who a year ago that would come off the bench, run the show, facilitate, distribute, and now you have the complete other extreme and other end of the spectrum in Chris Paul, while Jordan Poole was amongst the league leaders in turnovers, and forget about the punch and the emotion and the chemistry just physically on the court, now replaced by the head of the chicken that is Chris Paul, who never turns the ball over. I think he's got like 6 on the entire season, and I think that him putting the ball in the hands of the right guy and distributing and that second unit where guys' minutes now are reduced. You don't have to worry about load management when it comes to Steph Curry and company. The second unit is getting more run because there's a level of confidence now for Steve Kerr and company. So I think that second unit is important as anything, JD.
It has been, and again, we can get into the chemistry component, but chemistry a lot of the times can be related to how well pieces fit together. It's not just whether guys like each other or enjoy coming to work with each other. It's on court, from a basketball standpoint, and that's the part where, as you get into the differences between Chris Paul and what he brings to the table and Jordan Poole, and look, it was risky in the sense that Poole, and look, we still haven't seen this team have to play without Steph Curry, and that was the one area, and everybody pointed this out when the Warriors made the deal. It's how will this team function if Steph Curry has to miss some games, because that was really the one area where Jordan Poole was at his most valuable for the Warriors. It was when you put him in the starting lineup, a lot of home games last year where he would average between 25 and 30 points, kind of do a Steph Curry light impression on those nights and keep the Warriors in games, and they won a lot of those games on the home floor last year, which allowed them to get to the 44 wins that they ultimately had. How does this team function? And look, maybe Steph doesn't miss as many games. He has the last few years. I think you almost have to pencil he's going to miss 20 at some point. Now, nobody wants to say that or think that 6 games in, but I do think that's something we need to file away for later. How will this team function in that instance, because there's always, I love saying this, there's two different kinds of depth, I feel like. There's depth where you have your whole team together and you love how the pieces fit 10, 11 deep and you can interchange off of that as long as you have everybody, right? You have everybody depth and you love how it all fits together. And then there's a couple of guys go out kind of depth and you have dudes who can step in and be carriers. And I think whether the Warriors have that kind of depth is still a question mark, only because we haven't had to see them play under those circumstances yet as far as this season goes. But you're right, Dan, as far as the on-court and the differences between Chris Paul and Jordan Poole. It has where I don't always love the CP3, Gary Payton II, Moody, Kaminga, Saric lineup. I think there's been a couple of stints where that lineup struggled to score. But in the first half of a couple of games, last night was one of them there for a little portion of the end of the I'm sorry, it was the two Sacramento games where it was an issue in the end of the second quarter, bridging the end of the first quarter, bridging the second quarter, in both of those games. But Steve Kerr has been able to make the adjustment in second halves. And then there's just been games where that group has been great, and you sub maybe Klay Thompson in for one of the young players, and it's really worked out. And yeah, you can't. 57-37 speaks for itself. And Chris Paul, while he's not maybe making shots, he's getting really good shots for others.
Yeah, and I think you really sort of summed up the fate of the Warriors this year, because this is about sustainability. And while we all bask in the glow of another thrilling win, and everybody's over the moon with the start, you can set your watch to the fact that Steph will go down with an injury. You hope it's not of the serious nature, but same thing with Chris Paul at some point. And why not Draymond Green, who has missed a good chunk over the last couple of years? This is a team, and this is what happens when you have a team that's in their mid-30s. I think that's when you really begin to find, and the challenges will really begin, and you'll find out a lot more about this Golden State Warrior team, which is why it's so important. Like a couple of years ago when they won an NBA title, they got out to that 18-2 start. And what that really provided, I think, throughout the season was that buffer for when Steph went down with the injury and Draymond was out with a serious injury. But because they had built up this huge cushion, they were able to withstand a lot of the sort of mid-season woes that they dealt with. And I think the same might hold true for this year. As they get off to the quick start and they win 5 or 6 to start the year, what you like to see is for them, again, to build up a sizable, whether it's a lead in the division or at least a one-loss percentage where they're comfortably well over 500, because I think it's an inevitability. At some point, Steph will go down. I think Chris Paul will be right behind him, and you just hope that it's not for a long duration, that the Golden State Warriors can withstand the blow.
I think you nailed it. I think it's about a cushion. It's about, and I think that's where these last two games, and the Warriors are living in a world, and maybe it didn't matter last year because they were coming off a championship and there was a little bit of a hangover and they had all these chemistry issues that we've talked about through the first hour of the show. But I do think when you look at where the Warriors are at, the last two games and winning these games with 0.2 of a second to go on the clock, they're huge wins because they go toward adding that cushion and adding that pad that the Warriors eventually are going to need. If they even if they lose these two games, they're 3-3, and we're talking about Klay Thompson shot back rims out or in and out. They get a tough call last night on the Draymond overturn. Maybe that goes another way, and OKC wins the game in overtime. They're 3-3, and we're talking about bad defense last night. We're talking about athleticism not being there against some of the younger teams, which I still think is going to be problematic over the course of the year. The Warriors are going to have to hang in a lot of those games. We'd be talking about why in the hell Trace Jackson-Davis wasn't active last night when he possibly could have helped them. I know you mentioned Draymond's take on that a little bit earlier. We would be talking about all of that, but the bigger issue to me, Dan, would be, well, you're 3-3 basically when you're fully healthy. And that was something that the Warriors, they did not make the most last year of when they had their when they have Steph and Clay and Draymond and Chris Paul all playing together, and I know Draymond missed the first couple, but when they have those guys playing together, this team has to win at an extremely high clip. And to this point, they're doing it, but they're going to have to do it because if they have to play 15, 20 games without Steph or without Steph and, God forbid, without Steph and Chris Paul at the same time, they might have a 2-8 in them. They might have a 3-9, 4-11 stretch in them over a 15-game span if they have to do it. So every single one of these wins that the Warriors are able to get right now, I think are hugely important to put in the bank.
And I'd also add to that throughout the regular season, as you mentioned, there's going to be the peaks and valleys, but you really have to think about this Warriors team that what you're witnessing right now resurfaces towards the end of the season or in the playoffs. So I think, again, it's just a matter of time before one of these older players, gets dinged. Of course, you hope it's not the severe variety as far as the injuries are concerned. But if Steph misses time, Andrew Wiggins missed a good chunk of last year, Draymond Green and Chris Paul, that when you get to the most important part of this season, that this team is intact. That when it gets to the playoffs, because I'm beginning to rethink just how important the regular season is now in the NBA, just generally speaking, when you look at what happened to the postseason a year ago with the Lakers getting to the Western Conference Finals and Miami making that remarkable run. Two very low-seeded teams. So, and especially a team like that of the Golden State Warriors that have proven they can win on the road. So seeding's always important, but I think when you look at this team, you want to make sure that, some of these guys are going to get dinged, let's be real. But when it comes to basketball in the latter part of the season, when the playoffs start, you just want to make sure that all of these guys are intact.
I think teams are already taking it more seriously. And look, I might be wrong. We'll throw this out. We'll put this in the JD might be naive. You can come down my road here as the weeks go on this show. But I think teams are already taking the regular season more seriously than they did last year. Last year was unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of teams going through the motion. I mean, there were 3 teams that cared last year in the Western Conference about the regular season, and they wound up being the top 3 teams in the West. It was Denver cared last year, and even they had Jamal Murray coming back off the injury early. They were doing some things where they were really bringing him along slowly. They wanted to make sure Michael Porter Jr. was healthy, so they didn't get off to a great start, I think, because of that. But they took the regular season seriously. Memphis took the regular season seriously. By the way, Memphis stinks. They're not making the playoffs. Like, they're done. Like, they're going to be a freaking lottery team this year. They lost to Portland last night. They are still looking for their first win on the season. They're 0-6, an NBA worst 0-6. They're not. It's funny. There were 2 teams not to go, Johnny pat on the back, and it's early. There were one team I was high on was OKC. One team I thought was going to be a disaster or had disaster potential, and that's Memphis. And Memphis has been that way with everything that went on off the floor and John Morant not coming back until who knows when, into December. They're in some big trouble. And the Kings were the other team, Dan, not to ramble on you, but it was Memphis, the Kings, and Denver that took the regular season seriously last year, and those wound up being the top 3 teams. Nobody else did. The Warriors didn't. Phoenix didn't. The Lakers didn't. The Clippers sure as hell never do. Other teams, I think, beneath them had some legitimate injury issues, like Minnesota, to where they were just in survival mode. And then you're getting into the play-in tournament type level teams at that point. Anyway, what the point I'm making though, Dan, is I think the Lakers are trying to take it more seriously. I think the Warriors are trying to take it more seriously. I think Phoenix is trying to, although they've been banged up and doing some weird things with Bradley Beal still hasn't played for them to this point of the season. Booker's played, I think, 2 games to this point. One of them was against the Warriors. So, there are varying degrees of this. But the point I'm making about the Warriors is if they can just be a little more buttoned up, and I think they saw this as an organization, if they can be a little more buttoned up and win some of these close games they lost last year, in particular on the road, they can be the team that turns 44 into low 50s. And if they turn 44 into low 50s, they're going to be a 1 or a 2 seed, even with everybody else taking it a little more seriously. And if they're a 1 or a 2 seed, I think they love their chances, if they're healthy, to be able to make a deep run and maybe win another NBA championship.
Well, maybe along those lines is what we witnessed last night throughout the NBA, and that is the play-in tournament. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Although I'd like to see this a little bit later in the year when, tensions begin to wane and maybe people aren't into it.
It does seem early.
Yeah.
I mean, we're like not even 2 weeks in.
But I got to tell you that there was a level of intensity last night. Now, I don't know if things were ratcheted up because this was a tournament game, but there was that sort of postseason feel, was there not?
There was. I wonder. I thought the league did a good job with the matchups last night, and I know they were tooting their own horn for. I think it was the most competitive night of the season in terms of point differential. I think every game that was played last night, I read a note, was decided by, I think, 4 points, an average of 4 points. So there were a lot of close games. I think what they did with the courts, while some of them are unaesthetically pleasing, I think what they did with the courts was kind of brilliant in that you let everybody know, because I think the whole tournament format is a little confusing as far as like what are tournament games, what are not tournament games. And so to put that on the court, if you're just dialing by, changing channels, and you see that court, you're going to wonder what the hell's going on. And so you can almost identify the court with, oh, this game's more significant. Maybe I'll watch this game. So I think it was a real subtle, I think, smart attempt by the NBA. Again, even though some of these courts, I think you could make the case, are hideous, to try and just let everybody know, hey, something different's going on in this game. I thought they did a nice job with the matchups last night. Obviously, with the pool play, you can kind of pick who you want to have debut it. For the Warriors game specifically, and just so everybody knows, it's all of the group games are every Friday and Tuesday in November. So I think that's the easiest. And again, I can go Johnny's schedule and get all convoluted and bore you to tears and put you to sleep and all that. I'm not going to do it. But the easiest way, if you're a listener and you're following along, maybe you're watching us on YouTube, when are these tournament games? I don't even know. It's November, and it's every Friday and every Tuesday in November are the and you'll see the weird courts and all of that. And those are the group play games that are going to determine who moves on the first week of December and plays in what will actually be the 8-team tournament that gets whittled to 4. Final 4 are going to go to Vegas. The championship game is going to be in Vegas that second Saturday on December the 9th. So that's how it all shakes out. As far as last night's game, though, goes, I think last night was just Oklahoma City's a raucous environment, and they have a young team that they're really thrilled with that's on the come. And I think the Warriors love those environments. I think it's why the Warriors have played so well in Sacramento. I think the Warriors love that hungry crowd on the road coming at them. And I think that's what ramped the intensity up for last night. I thought it was just a young challenger to the Warriors, old guys on the throne, and match up with styles, right? I mean, the Thunder are good in ways that really can expose, I think, the Warriors defensively. So I thought it was a great matchup on a night full of really good matchups.
Yeah, and I think Oklahoma City is thought to be one of those up-and-coming young teams that has compiled talent, and now with Chet Holmgren healthy, they're a team that could be a sleeper. And while they've done well early on in the season, this is one of those games that they had circled. It's an asterisk. It's like, we've done well, but here come the Warriors. Let's just find out how good we are. So they were clearly ready to ball last night, and they came out.
And they didn't have their best player.
No.
I mean, they didn't even have their best player, which I think is, doesn't take anything away from the win. But on OKC's side, I think they have to be pretty happy with the fact that they played as well as they did without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
By the way, we should just spend a moment or two on Chet Holmgren, because he's sort of got lost after, last year he sat out when he got hurt in that, pickup game out in Seattle with LeBron James, and he sits out a year, and this rookie out of Gonzaga, he gets playing in the shadow, and it's a huge shadow, that of Wembanyama, but wow. I mean, these guys are changing the game. We're not talking about, forwards or point guard shooting threes, but did you ever think you'd live long enough, JD, to see 7 feet plus, 7'1" and 7'4" with handle, shooting threes, up and unders, closing out on guys? I mean, this game is literally changing before our very eyes thanks to these two guys.
I think everybody watched Chet Holmgren play in college and watched him at Gonzaga. And he was obviously a terrific player there, and the injury last year was unfortunate. I was not expecting what he had in the bag last night to happen. I was not I was blown away, and I think the Warriors were with some of the post-game comments from not only Steph Curry, they did the jersey swap. Draymond acknowledged the fact, like, this dude is a problem. Like, this dude is nice. And, as good as he was in college, and I was not expecting him to be that good coming off the injury this early in the season. And it was like, wow. Like, I came out of that game thinking OKC could be a contender here in the next year and a half to 2 years. And
the second youngest roster, I want to say. Everybody's like 25 and younger.
And they're set up to make trades. If they want to add a superstar to their mix, they can pick the top 4 or 5 that they want to keep and maybe use some of the other players to add a stabilizing force in terms of a veteran if they want to. They may not need to, and Oklahoma City's a small market, but they've shown in the past that they're not afraid, like when they went and got Paul George. I mean, they're not afraid to trade some draft capital and maybe cobble together some young players that aren't going to be stars in an attempt to bring a star to Oklahoma City, knowing that they're not going to get a star to sign in free agency. The only way they're getting a star in OKC is if they draft him or if they trade for him and basically force him to stay there.
Yeah, it's not like back in the day. And I think that you talked about there's just something about Sacramento and OKC, and I think that a lot of this is the history, although these kids were maybe like 10 years old when you're talking about Kevin Durant and Westbrook back in the day with the Warriors and OKC and the rivalry. But I still think that the Warriors, when they go there, the fans certainly remember. But Steph Curry has had some Curry has had some of his greatest NBA moments on that floor. And I just think that, he knows it and the fans know it. And I think that there's something special he has in the bag when it's OKC and certain teams in this league when they go on the road, regardless of how young or old the team is.
I think that they love playing in that building. Again, I covered the conference finals in 2016, different era. That place was electric as any building I've ever been in at that point in time. They love hoop, and it's the small town vibe, and it does kind of remind me growing up in Sacramento back in the late 90s and the early 2000s when they had, Weber and those guys all coming up, and Jay Will and Mike Bibby and Peja Stojakovic and all of that. So I think that, and you're right, I think the OG Warriors love going in that building because they have a lot of great memories in that building, no doubt. All right, 888-957-9570. We're halfway through. We'll continue the conversation. We'll also get back into the debate over the Warriors' chemistry and why it's better this year than last. Is it as simple as winning? Well, Steve Kerr weighed in on that with Willard and Dibbs earlier this week as Warriors This Week rolls on here, 95.7 The Game.
Black Friday is coming, and that's the smart time to shop for a top-rated TV from Samsung, LG, or Sony. But why wait? You can get those Black Friday TV deals right now at Video Only. And then
We talk about this in-season tournament, and it's a playoff game. And it was a fun game to play in. The intensity level was there. So job well done to the NBA, adding this type of excitement in November, because there'll be some dark days in November. But your games like this, you can appreciate them. So it's great. And then they had guys make plays down the stretch. We had guys make plays. Came out on top.
The NBA, Devone, the NBA's got to be loving Draymond Green going PR Maven with the take on the in-season tournament in the game last night. It was an excellent game last night as the Warriors get the win 141-139. It did have more juice than a normal November 3rd game, without a doubt. Now, maybe that game just would have been an awesome game on a night where, every night across the league, there's usually one or two awesome games. Last night, it was more significant than that. As I pointed out, the margin of victory top to bottom, just kind of looking around. Indiana beat Cleveland by 5. Milwaukee beat the Knicks by 5. Miami beat Washington by 7. You had Brooklyn win by 2 at Chicago. The Warriors won by 2. Portland beat Memphis by 2 in overtime up in Portland last night. And then Denver and Dallas, that was the one game that Denver had kept the Mavs at arm's length for a significant portion of, but they ended up winning that game by 11. But a lot of close games last night across the NBA for the in-season tournament. And so, I'm kind of with Draymond at this point. So far, so good.
I think it's a good idea. And kudos to the NBA for, getting out of the box, because the one thing you struggle with, the NBA and certainly Major League Baseball, and this is usually the latter part of the season, but in an 82-game season, there's a lack of focus. There's a lack of interest. I think that things get a little bit homogenous towards the middle of the season. This really captivates a lot of excitement. I think that this is going to grow once we figure out what it is that we're doing here. And once fans become accustomed, because a lot of the people I'm reading here on the text line are like, what the hell is this all about? Can you explain it to me? The format's a little confusing.
It is hard to understand.
Yeah, but I
really
think
is.
that after this inaugural year, you'll sort of, you'll get an idea. And we'll see how this whole thing plays out when you get into these knockout rounds. And I do believe that there's 2 wild cards. And then the championship game is going to be played in Las Vegas. And we'll just see the level of excitement and how this plays out. But I do think that it's a good idea on the part of the NBA. It's renewed some fan energy. And I guess the one thing that I find a little bit peculiar is that all these games obviously count towards the regular season standings, but the championship game of the play-in tournament does not, if I'm reading that correct. Is that right?
That is correct. That will be what ultimately is an 83rd game for those two teams. They fit the rest of this into every other team except for the teams that go to the final and play in Vegas on December 9 will play 82 games regardless of whether they advance to the round of 8 or get eliminated or whatever. The way basically that whole week in December, as far as the schedule goes, is just wiped out. The 8 teams that make it to the past the group play are going to be guaranteed to play 2 games. Everybody's going to be guaranteed to play 2 games that week. Whether you're playing the round of 8 and the round of 4, whether you're completely out of it, you're going to play 2 games among the group of teams that didn't make it to the round of 8 on different days. Like they mapped it out. They actually organized it really well. It's convoluted and a little bit hard to explain, but they did organize it really well to where the schedule is still going to remain mostly balanced. And they have, if you don't make it, you're still going to play 2 games that week. You're just going to play on different days based on, different days than the days where the actual semifinals and quarterfinals are going on as far as the actual tournament goes. And then, the one last game for the 2 teams that are standing at the end will be an 83rd game that won't count. So they'll just level everything else off at 82. And it's 6 groups of 5 to get the 30 teams. It's 6 winners, the winner of each group. Think World Cup soccer or the Olympics in terms of best record in your group advances. And then the best team among the teams that do not win their group in each conference is how they determine the two wild cards. And so somebody on the Comcast Business text line had said, so the Warriors beat the Thunder. Does that mean the Thunder are eliminated? No, because every team is going to end up playing 4 games in group play. The Warriors group is with the Thunder, it's with Minnesota, it's with San Antonio and Sacramento. So at the end of this thing, while they all count as regular season games, there's going to be, whoever has the best record in the group is going to be the team that moves on. And so the Warriors are 1-0 in that group, Dan. And then you look around at, I don't think there were no other games in the Warriors group last night. But those games will be taking place again. Anytime you see Minnesota and the Spurs or the Kings, Oklahoma City, all these teams are going to play each other here in the group portion over the course of November.
It sounded hokey when I first heard it, but I like it. I think we'll have a better idea once this championship takes place in December. And incentivizing, and somebody mentioned this maybe on the broadcast, that Oklahoma, keep in mind, is a young team. So when you're a young team, you still haven't made your money. But they're going to start. Josh Giddey's going to get a paycheck, and certainly Chet Holmgren, if he continues on this trajectory, these guys are going to sign big contracts. But as of right now, $500K, an additional $500,000, which is what you get for winning the the in-season tournament. That's some significant coinage, I would think. And I don't know, maybe Major League Baseball, although basketball and baseball are two separate animals when you come to tournaments. But again, I think the NBA got it right. And, when you think about Major League Baseball and those dog days in the middle of the summer when you're like, my God, I can't take any more of this, shaking things up and then maintaining, obviously, the status quo when it comes to the postseason and playoffs and an NBA championship. But this idea of crowning an in-season tournament winner, we'll see how it plays out. But as of right now, the renewed energy, I'm on board, man.
Well, and the NBA has done a real good job, and no league is better at the faux hype than the NBA is, but they've done a hell of a job promoting it. I mean, there hadn't been. I mean, every freaking game, and every show, I feel like has mentioned it at some point in time among the national television partners. It's been, I think, bombarded on social media. I think it's bombarded in terms of commercials in the television and streaming stratosphere. And so I think they've done a hell of a job trying to make people think it's a big deal and trying to get the players on board with, even if they don't believe it, at least playing along in this thing to this point. So, yeah, I didn't love the idea, but, I mean, I think they're trying to do something that makes November a little more interesting when they're going up against football. And they're doing it on nights where there isn't football. It's Tuesday and Friday nights. Obviously, they're not going Thursday, Sunday, Monday night or anything like that. So they're trying to, I think, own Friday and own Tuesday throughout the course of November, while a lot of people are focused on football season, bring a positive light to the beginning of the season. I think everybody gets more into the NBA right around Christmas time and the holidays and New Year's. And then, sure, you're still going to have the dog days of January, but the dog days of January also come with a lot more eyeballs being on the game as NFL teams get eliminated and you get closer to the Super Bowl. And then once you get to February, it's sort of the home stretch, and you can start talking about playoff seeding and the trade deadline and all those things. So I think the NBA is trying to make themselves more interesting, more relevant. I love what they did as far as the player participation rules and trying to limit some of the load management and trying to limit some of the nights that star players take off. I think, I've been pretty hard on Adam Silver and the league along those lines, but I think I'll give them credit for at least trying to do some new things and freshen up the blood a little bit. 888-957-9570. You got a couple of calls here. Let's get to Bobby in Oakland on Warriors this week on 95.7 The Game. Hey, Bobby.
Hey, good to hear you guys. Got my show back. I'm glad to hear you guys on the air for sure, man. I got to say, when this in-season tournament, like you kind of alluded to, JD, man, I was thinking Adam Silver's about to destroy this league. What is he doing? But yesterday, you flip around. Man, we can't lose this game. I'm talking about the Warriors. It's going to put us in the bad position. I did a whole 180 turnaround. So I think it's going to be a success. It already is. It's starting to be a success. Add that extra energy, something to play for. I think I like it. I got a question. I know the young guys, TDJ and Pozinski, were sent down. I don't know if I agree with that. I wanted to get you guys' thought on that. I thought they should get more playing time up here. I thought they were doing okay. I want to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. I think that would be a big topic today, Dan, if the Warriors had lost, especially the Trace Jackson-Davis component, because athletically he stacks up, I think, pretty well, and the Thunder it was a layup line, really, especially in the third quarter. I mean, the Thunder were just putting their head down and going to the basket at will on the Warriors. Trace Jackson-Davis has shown a propensity, the 4 blocks against the Pelicans, the ability to defend and be a rim protector that the Warriors need. I will say this. I think it's been a little overblown. Trace Jackson-Davis basically played 5 minutes against the Kings, played well a week ago in Sacramento, and he played a lot, 20 minutes against the Pelicans, in part because Kaminga was out of that game, and there were some more minutes that were opened up. He played Steve Kerr, Saric, and Trace Jackson-Davis together a lot in that game against the Pelicans. And again, he played well, but don't mistake him playing well for playing a lot. He really hasn't played a lot through the first 5 games before last night. And Podziemski got his opportunity again on the night where Klay Thompson was out. That's really the only night that he stepped into the rotation. So I thought it was a little peculiar, to be honest, when the announcement was made. The Warriors did explain it as, hey, go down and participate in training camp with the Santa Cruz team, get the experience of that. They deemed that the experience of that was more beneficial than for the most part, probably riding the bench on this road trip for the Warriors. But then you look at last night and you think, well, Trace Jackson-Davis maybe could have helped them. Although I should point out, Dario Saric is the number 2 center, and Dario Saric scored 20 points last night and helped the Warriors win that game by hitting 4 threes.
Yeah, and I think this just simply comes down to, okay, so who are you going to take minutes from? Is it Chris Paul, Jonathan Kaminga, Gary Payton II, Dario Saric, as you mentioned?
And it was Kaminga in the game that Jackson-Davis played because Kaminga was out.
Exactly, and Klay Thompson also missed some time, which is why you saw guys. And are you going to sit Moses Moody for a couple more minutes so that these guys get some run? So I think this becomes a numbers game. But as we alluded to in the previous segment, that you don't want this to happen, but it's an inevitability, in my opinion, that there's a good chance when you're talking about guys on the wrong side of 30 and 35 years of age that comprise the key parts of your lineup, that somebody's going to go down with an injury. And when that happens, everybody gets bumped up in the rotation, right? So you're going to see these guys get run. But as of right now, and this isn't new, Steve Kerr does this with his rookies. He did this, as I mentioned, with Kaminga and Moody, and you can go on down the line. When these guys aren't in the rotation, rather than have them sit there, let's get them playing so that they're learning. Let's get them in scrimmages. Let's get them out in Santa Cruz in the G League so that they're actively, learning this game, so that when we do put them in a contest, it's more of a seamless transition. I do, however, find it somewhat fascinating that Draymond Green made a point of it last night, saying we need these guys here. We need these guys in practice because we feed off of their energy. Their energy is a part of what it is that we do now. Now, they may not play in the game, but just that youthful exuberance now is something that's almost becoming a drug for that of Draymond Green and company. And maybe it gets back to the chemistry that we've talked about all along here this morning. But I found it really peculiar and interesting, rather, that Draymond would highlight the fact that the 2 kids weren't there. And because of that, he almost said it was part of the reason that they were sort of in this funk. And if he was to sort of point a finger as to why they were lacking this sort of energy, it was because the 2 kids were on board for the trip.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be something to consider, I think, moving forward as they try and balance the roles of Trace Jackson-Davis and Podziemski. I understood why they did it last night as far as trying to make sure that they can get some run and I think get acclimated, because they are going to be up and down this year if there aren't injuries. And I think, there will be injuries, but I think because the Warriors are healthy now, they wanted to use this as an opportunity to get those guys down, knowing that for now they weren't going to be playing a lot, because there may be other times during the year where the plan would be to have them in Santa Cruz, but they're not going to be able to be in Santa Cruz because their services are going to be needed with the big club because of the injuries. So it's a nice problem to have if those two can play. And I think that's the confidence level that I think when you talk to people within the organization, there's a confidence level that these guys don't have to play every night, but they're going to be capable of playing when they have to play. And I think that's something that the Warriors really, they haven't had that. It goes back to that debate about what kind of depth do you have? Do you have the depth where you love your team when everybody's there? Or do you have the depth to where you feel like some guys can step up and fill the void if you're missing a star and a couple of rotation players? And, again, we're going to find out, but in talking to people and, just kind of hearing the rumblings around the organization, they're very high on that overall depth.
And we don't know until they get on the floor and prove themselves. The sample size is just so small right now for these two kids. But the one thing that you hear collectively is the high level of IQ, right? The high basketball IQ when it comes to Baby T or this Trace Jackson Davis. And the same thing with Podziemski, that these guys are sort of old souls. Now, again, will that translate into them being impactful in their first year? We'll find out. But one thing that Draymond has alluded to, as well as Steph Curry, that these guys, they have high basketball IQ. And so while there's going to be mistakes, I think part of the problem with the Warriors, especially when you were infusing a lot of the youth, was a lot of not understanding where to be on rotations defensively, them not understanding spacing. Now, a lot of that's just going to happen because you're a rookie and you're playing with the Warriors. But these guys, just from a between the ears and a cerebral perspective, seem to be a little bit further ahead of the game than most.
Absolutely. And funny, Comcast Business Text Line says, yeah, JD, they were high on Patrick Baldwin Jr. too. Well, I think they were high on Patrick Baldwin Jr., but again, were they high enough on him to where it was going to complicate, he was going to be the reason you don't make a deal for Chris Paul and relieve yourself of Jordan Poole's contract at the same time? No. Now, they want Patrick Baldwin Jr. You throw Patrick Baldwin Jr. in, and you trust that you have enough other players that are going to be able to fill those minutes, which the Warriors obviously did. So that to me comes it becomes a little bit more inconsequential. One other quick one on the text line. What's up with Kaminga? 925 says he's not getting any better. Moody definitely put in some work. He looks stronger, faster, and more skilled. I would push back on that as far as Kaminga. I always say this, and I don't know if we've gotten into it, but Kaminga, people tend to go crazy when I talk about Jonathan Kaminga, because I'm one of the few that have not anointed him. I don't look at Jonathan Kaminga, Dan, as if he's not fulfilling his potential because he doesn't look like a star right now. Like, I think the hype around Kaminga for a lot of Warrior fans, and I think some in the media perpetuated this to a fault, is like, he's going to be the next Giannis or Kawhi or Paul George or whatever the heck. And look, he may very well be down the line, but I'm evaluating Jonathan Kaminga much differently than I think a lot of Warrior fans are. I look at Jonathan Kaminga as, can he become an effective, playable role player consistently throughout the course of the regular season and earn playoff minutes in that capacity? And I'm not looking at it as third-year leap, and he's going to be dramatically better, and oh my God, this guy's going to be an all-star next year. And I think a lot of people are unfair to him, have set the bar too high too quickly as far as what he is or what he can be. I thought Jonathan Kaminga was good last night in the second half. I thought he was bad in the first half. I think in the regular season, November, you're going to still go back to him in the second half if you're Steve Kerr. Now, maybe in a playoff game, you don't go back to him after the first half that he had last night. But in the regular season, you absolutely go back to him. And Jonathan Kaminga had 19 points. He didn't do much else other than score, but they needed those buckets, especially in the third quarter. I mean, he had bucket after bucket. He made 9 shots last night to go for 19 points. the Warriors needed him. To me, it's more about the little things, and can Kaminga become an effective role player for this team? I sort of put that in a different category, Dan, than what will the player be, what will he become down the line as far as the high ceiling goes. And I'll be honest, it hasn't looked great every single night for Kaminga to this point this season, but I think he's done enough to where he shows he is helping this team right now. And when you talk to coaches and you hear what people have to say, they're buying into the fact that he's more receptive to coaching and his head's in a better place than it was a year ago. So I think that's a net positive, even if we're not seeing the borderline star level potential on a night in, night out basis.
Yeah, I was one of those that was big on Kaminga, and I still am to a certain degree. He just has to eat what's on his plate, and the stardom will come if at some point he puts it all together. But the one thing with Kaminga, and now as we get into his third year, he just has to slow it down. It just has to come down a tick or two. And usually as a rookie or in your first 2 years, things are going 150 miles an hour. You can still see that the athleticism and the talent is there, but he still is in a rush at times. And he clearly is, as fast as he might still be going here in year three, and the turnovers, I think this is what you were alluding to in the first half.
Yeah, he was bad in the first half.
Yeah, but he slowed it down. He's still a little bit more. And if you never saw him play before, you would say that's patient. But yes, he is exerting a little bit more patience this year. And I think that's the key with this guy, is that this thing just has to slow down. He needs to slow down a tick or two, because I still think that aside from Wiggins, he's the only guy in that team that can go get his. If he's out on a wing and he needs to get to the rim, he's the one guy who can finish on guys. He has that ability to go the full 94 feet. The Warriors just simply don't have that sort of player, and he has the ability to do that. But all of this just has to, it just has to come down just a level or two for this guy. He's still throwing the ball to Steph Curry on the sidelines, who's not playing. He gets ratcheted up to where he's vulnerable to a lot of mistakes from time to time.
No, and I think there's times where we'll get into this coming back, and there was a text message I wanted to get to, but I think there's times where he's trying to I think he's trying to do the things that he's being coached to do, and that's created some of the turn. Like, there was a point where he clearly wanted to take a corner three last night, but had the thought, I don't think they want me to take this three. I haven't been hitting. I'm going to try to make a play. Then he winds up turning it over. So I think there is still a little bit of that's in play as well. We'll get into more detail coming up. All right, 888-957-9570. 2 hours down, 1 hour to come. Warriors this week, 95.7 The Game.
At Grainger, we're for the ones who specialize in saving the day, and for the ones who've mastered the art of keeping business moving. We offer industrial-grade supplies for every industry, with same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders, all backed by real people ready to help. So you can get the right answers and products right when you need them. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
So, how's your research going?
Surprising. After I figured out the top-rated TVs in our price range,
You always talk about young guys bringing energy. That's their job. And we don't have to tell those young guys to bring energy. They do it every single day. So I wasn't overly shocked that our energy wasn't there because they are the guys that lift our energy level, and they weren't here. So we got to do a better job of that. But overall, give this team a lot of credit. We stuck with it and pulled the win out.
Yeah, Draymond Green with some pretty high praise as far as what the younger players who weren't around have brought to the table to this point of the season. And I think in the grand scheme of things, as we welcome you back in here to Warriors This Week, hour number 3, John Dickinson and Dan Devone. Devone, I think Draymond gives the Warriors coaching staff and I think front office a little bit to consider when he says that as far as how they manipulate the ups and downs of when those young players, and we're talking about Brandon Pajemski and Trace Jackson Davis specifically, are with the big club versus trying to get some reps down in Santa Cruz.
Every time I hear Draymond reference the locker room feeding off of the energy of the younger players, I still indirectly feel as though he's still reminding everybody just how much he enjoys going to work every day now that Jordan Poole's out of the room. Maybe that's just me, but
no, that was the debate. Yeah. And look, we played it earlier, and maybe we'll re-rack it for people that are just joining us in this final hour. 888-957-9570. But the comments that he made after the Kings win on Wednesday night had everybody talking all day Thursday. Is he singling out Jordan Poole? Like, is he basically saying, yeah, last year was trash, and now that dude ain't here, and everything's great again?
Yeah, and I would carry it over to what it is he said last night. And it might be a bit of a reach, but he continues to reference how important it is that what it is that we do in the locker room and at practice, that we get along, and that this younger core, unlike maybe Jordan Poole and the younger cores over the last couple of seasons, these guys are different. And every time I feel that I sense that contrast, to me, it's his subtle way of saying, hey, man, there was a cancer in the room last year, and now he's gone, and it has a lot to do with what it is that you're seeing on the floor these days.
We'll get to Draymond's comments on Wednesday and what it sparked as far as the debate on Thursday. We'll re-rack that. And then Steve Kerr also addressed it on Thursday. He joined Willard and Dibbs here on 95.7 The Game, and he had some pretty interesting comments about it as well. Let's go ahead and do that. For those that didn't hear earlier, let's go ahead and just kind of run through that sound at this point again. And so this was Draymond after they beat the Kings Wednesday night, just talking about the chemistry being better than it was last year. One-year thing, anomaly, and then Draymond went on to get into even more detail here about the way things were last season. Yeah, so there you go. I mean, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier. We will hear Steve Kerr's response. I do want to get to the phone call we have as well. But just, I mean, you said it, and as you were saying it, I was just thinking about the press conference Wednesday night. We play the audio, and it's like, gosh, like it's twofold. It's one, he's talking about Jordan Poole, isn't he? And it's two, like, you were part of that problem last year as well. Not that you weren't still deemed significant enough a player to keep over Jordan Poole, but you were part of setting that bad tone.
At this point, JD, he may as well just say the name. He may as well just come out and say Jordan Poole. He won't.
To me, it needs to. The veiled references need to stop. And I know Steve Kerr last night, and we'll play what he said to Willard and Dibbs here in a second. But I know Steve Kerr last night, and he did this in Sacramento a week ago. He really is done with he's gotten an annoyed tone to any kind of question about last year. Like, we just need to put it in the rearview mirror, I think is what he put, like he's, I think, done talking about it. It's like, this team is its own ethos. This team's 5-1. This team's got its own identity. It's different. We don't need to dissect every time we win a close game why it's different. But, let's focus on this season. And I think, he doesn't want, and I think this is where it's, I don't think he wants to keep relitigating Jordan Poole and did he, didn't he, to what level was he I don't think he wants to keep doing that over and over and over in the post-game press conference this season. And I do think he probably looks at what Draymond said, and while Draymond did not mention him by name, I mean, how can you not think that that's who he's talking about?
Yeah. And I think that it was, when you talk about the punch, it was a dark day in Warrior lore, and it was something that now that chapter is closed and Poole's out of the building, you can see Steve Kerr's like, we're winning, let's focus on this and move on. You're right. He not only does he not want to relitigate, he doesn't want to revisit or think about what was one of the ugliest moments in his tenure, if not the ugliest. But I think to Draymond's point, and it's time for Draymond to talk about something else, but I do find it interesting that is clearly evident. And Draymond has a tendency to speak and say things that everyone else is thinking in the room. And we surmise and we sort of handicap the early part of the season for the Golden State Warriors. That might be the one thing, and Draymond Green is letting us know that is the big difference as we try and find out what exactly it is that's making the Warriors play so much better this year as opposed to last year. And Draymond's telling all of us is that Jordan Poole is no longer here. What might happen if this continues is that it will not be long before, and I don't put this above Jordan Poole, but he will respond. And I also think that's the last thing Steve Kerr wants to get into is a verbal war between these two, where Jordan Poole starts to retaliate, and not only the likes of Draymond Green, but maybe the Warriors and an organization as a whole.
Well, and then it just doesn't go away at all at that point. And look, I mean, Jordan Poole's going to come back and play the Warriors, I think, right around Christmas time in Chase Center. And so that's going to be coming up in December. And I think, the reports and the stories and the interviews and all of that's going to happen, I think, at that point in time. Yeah, December the 22nd. The Wizards take on the Warriors in Chase Center. So that'll be something that's coming up here around the holiday. Look forward to that. All right, Duck Sauce is up on the phone lines, 888-957-9570. What's going on, Duck Sauce? Thanks for calling in. How are you this morning?
Hey, doing well. Good morning, fellas. JD, good to hear the Saturday show on the air. It's my favorite show.
Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in.
Yes, sir. A couple quick takes. The first was just on Klay Thompson. I think he's going to average less points this year, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be – I think he could still have a better year with less points. I just love how he's been so measured so far. He's not hunting shots. And I just really like, his take so far and how he's going through games. I also thought contrary, I've heard other callers call in throughout the week on 95.7 kind of saying that they still think he was an issue defensively. I kind of think he's held up pretty well defensively this year so far. I was curious what you guys thought on that. And then my other take was just when you guys were talking about Kaminga. To me, Kaminga, I think he's definitely made strides. for him to be the player some fans, I think, see him being is, to me, it comes down to his handle. Like, if he can't he needs to be more fluid with his handle. And if he can unlock that could unlock some other things for him. But, you know, he may just not be that player. He might be just a little too stiff. But again, I do think he's been better this year so far. His decision-making's been better. And then the last thing I wanted to say just on last night's game, I apologize if you guys brought it up, but one play that got lost to me because the fourth quarter was so good was that no-look alley-oop from Steph earlier in the game to Gary Payton was absolutely filthy. Wow, what a pass. So that's all I got. Thanks for the time, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it was Magic Johnson-esque. I mean, it was spectacular, and I think Duck Sauce is spot on. I do think it got lost in the fact that the game was so good down the stretch and back and forth and in doubt and all of that. I agree with the take on Kaminga. Like, I think Kaminga's been fine. Like, I think he's helped him. I think he's been up and down, but he's been playable, and I think he's more coachable. And, yeah, I think the handle ultimately is probably what determines his ceiling, that and the shooting ability and the motor. Kaminga's motor really wasn't there last night as far as defense and as far as hustle plays and rebounding, but he was able to get downhill a couple times and hit some pull-ups in the lane that the Warriors really needed, more than a couple. I mean, he was 9 of 15. So, and the Warriors really needed those buckets. So I'm not down on Kaminga at all. It's funny. I'm the guy who often from the fan base has been criticized for being too down on Kaminga. I'm actually not down on Kaminga at all right now, but I'm not viewing him under the lens of this season he's going to make some significant third-year leap that's going to turn him into a borderline all-star caliber player. He may become that, but that's not about how he helps this team this year.
Yeah, I still think he's the biggest tease on the team because I think that, you know, he's sort of the proverbial powder keg. There is something there, and maybe, you know, in year 3 I need to move on, but I just get a sense that there's...
Well, maybe it's year 4, year 5. Like, it still could happen. Like, I'm not denying that it could happen still, Dan.
Yeah, he is the best athlete on that team, I think, as far as going rim to rim and just creating something out of nothing. You know, he doesn't have to come off of pin downs to get a shot. He doesn't need a step back. He has the ability to take you to the rim. And when an offense gets stagnant, he still has that ability. And now he's incorporated a little mid-range, a little pull-up from 10 to 12 feet. It's there. It's just, again, to reiterate, it just needs to slow down for him a little bit. He reminds me of a rookie quarterback in the NFL where his head's on a swivel, but usually over time, the speed of the game begins to slow down for QBs. He's still a little bit rushed, and I think that to me is the key. When this thing begins to come down a tick or two, we'll see all that ability come to fruition.
Yeah, and as far as Klay Thompson goes, Klay's been really good. I think what's your take on Klay's defense? I think Klay's defense has been solid. I know they're asking him to guard different types of players. I don't think it's been perfect, but I do think he's held up, and I agree with the take that he may average less points this year and help him win more games. To me, it's about efficiency for Klay. It's not about raw numbers. Like, we can get into the raw numbers, and he hit 301 threes, and he hit 41.2%, but there were too many games where he was either awesome or he was terrible. And you added it up at the end of the year, and the overall numbers were really good. I don't deny Klay Thompson at all when he says that, and he kind of gets, upset with maybe the media or the fans for not respecting the totality of the numbers. But to me, it's about how you get the numbers. And it can't be half the games you're awesome and half the games you basically are a big part of the reason why your team loses. And I feel like that's what it was last year. This year's been a completely different story. I think he has been more conscientious on the shot selection. I think, Steiny said it this week on Steiny and Guru show. He's trying to play within himself more. And I think that's noticeable. And I think that ultimately helps this team win, which is the best thing that Klay Thompson can do as far as, trying to get paid as much as he possibly can by this team. It isn't about the numbers that are going to get Klay paid. It's about the willingness to maybe take a step back to allow the team as a whole to move forward and get back to the level that they're used to.
I think for him to be consistent is that he, and this is true for everybody, but he more than anyone else on that team just needs to let the game come to him. He's still in that mode. If he hits a few, he's going to heat check. He still thinks he's got 37 in the bag in a quarter against Sacramento, and everybody wants to see me light this thing up. Just take what the defense provides you. I love him in a mid-range. That is one of, he has the most picturesque jumper maybe in the history of the sport, but he just needs to let all of this transpire and take place throughout the course of the game. If you're open, take it. If you got someone off the dribble, but do not force or feel as though you got to be that guy of 5 or 6 years ago. Just if he can stay within, the context of a game, I think Clay will be fine. And I think if that's the attitude, you'll see a lot more consistency as far as his numbers are concerned going forward.
Let's get to Eugene joining us in the South Bay. Eugene at 888-957-9570. Hey, Eugene.
Hey, guys. 2 quick points I want to make. I think, one, this team looks good. This really reminds me of the 2022 championship team. I mean, like how long did it take us to get not 4 straight, but 4 road wins last year? JD, you might know this, but I feel like it was after the All-Star break at least. So it feels good. I think with the Steph-led team, chemistry is so big because even on ball or off ball, it flows through him. So it seems good. But to Draymond, I don't think his comments were wrong. You could tell even from TV, those guys hated each other and didn't want to be together outside the core 3. But Draymond's got to learn, you can't, it's right, but you can't say that. It's just you're a vet. And to JD's point, you're a part of the problem too. So that kind of irked me a little bit, but Draymond's Draymond, so that's all I got. Love to hear your comments.
Yeah, I think at some point, regardless of whether he's pointing out Jordan Poole, at some point, Dan, it's just got to stop. At some point, to me, fine. If he was the problem, and I don't even know that Draymond was taking a sneaky shot at Jordan. I think you could read it that way. Again, didn't mention him by name, but even if he was taking a sneaky shot, it's got to stop. Just make it about, and I think that's what Steve Kerr's trying to make as far as some of his post-game press conferences. It's about this team in this moment, this season. And so, I think the quicker it can stop going backwards, Draymond is great because he's so open and honest, but sometimes those things create conversations that don't necessarily need to be had.
Yeah, and I think that it should be evident to everybody that Draymond, all right, you were right that Jordan Poole's gone and you're a better team, but let's just stop. It's evident to everybody who's a basketball fan who follows the Golden State Warriors. At this point, we can see with our own eyes what's happening as far as the chemistry translating to the positive play on the court. We don't need to hear from you anymore because only bad things can happen with him continuing to pound that drum from this point forward. Go ahead, JD.
For Eugene, because he asked, and I meant to look this up earlier. I didn't mention it last night on the post game on Warriors wrap up. I did mention the Warriors got their 3rd road win last year on December the 18th when they were 3-14. They then fell to 3-15, 3-16 before they did get their 4th road win. The Warriors got their 4th road win last year on January 13th.
Wow.
January 13th, they improved to 4-16 when they won at San Antonio at the Alamo Dome. Remember, they crammed 67,000 in the Alamo Dome on January 13th. The night, the Warriors won that game 144-113. And that was when the Warriors, they were 4-0 this year after being 4-16 a year ago through 20 games on the road. Impressive stuff. So, yeah, Eugene, I got that nugget for you. Mark and Millbrae back with us here on 95.7 The Game. Hey, Mark.
What's up, guys? Yeah, really impressed with how the Warriors are being able to pull out these road games. Unlike last year, they would have lost last night and blown that in the worst way possible. But this year, it's a different story. After the opening night loss, this team is really rolling in, and good teams really find grind out ways to win games even when they're not playing against an OKC is an ascending tough team, even without Alexander last night. Just a hell of a game. You could already see what CP3 has done for this second unit here. I mean, guys like Saric, another great signing who is already making a great impact. Kaminga, his basketball IQ of Chris Paul is allowing these guys to thrive. And unlike last year where they really struggled when they went to their second unit, this second unit actually has an identity. And barring CP3 goes down, I expect this to really continue. I just love the way the flow of this team is playing on both ends of the ball. And this is the type of basketball that they played a couple years ago when they won the title over Boston. So far, so good. And in a tough Western Conference, this is how they're going to have to keep playing because it's going to be a monster trying to get through the West this year. And they've stocked up and put in the right pieces. And these young guys like Moody are really going to follow along playing with CP3. So his basketball IQ really wearing off on these young guys, which they desperately need to not grind out our vets. Thanks for the time, guys.
Thanks, Skills. Good phone call. 888-957-9570. That was Mark and Millbrae. Skills is coming up after the break. We are up against it. So Skills, we'll get to you first thing out of the chute. Final segment. Man, we're flying along here 2.5 hours down. We got one more segment to go. We'll keep it rolling until noon. He's Devone. I'm JD. Warriors this week, 95.7 The Game.
November is a great time to get a new TV. Now that the top-rated brands like Samsung, LG, and Sony are at the lowest prices of the year. With Black Friday deals available, what more could you...
won the title. Jokic has established himself as the best player in the game right now. And their additional pieces, everything is intact with that team. And they have it all covered with Jamal Murray, with Porter, and Gordon providing the strength, and against Jokic distributing and scoring. To say they're formidable is the understatement of the season. If you're looking for any sort of, they won the title, they're not going to be the same, everybody's looking for them. Well, that's true, but they've been equal to the task to this point. I don't see any holes in Denver, at least at this point.
No, and Jokic goes for 33 last night. They beat Dallas 125-114. They are 5-1, and the Warriors are 5-1. And you look at the, they beat the Lakers in the opener. They have road wins at Memphis and Oklahoma City. They have home wins against Dallas and Utah. So they're beating who's in front of them. But the win last night against Dallas comes as the Mavs had opened the season playing very well to the early point. Dallas, that was their first loss last night, as there is just one undefeated team now. Boston is 4-0, and they are obliterating everybody the first week and a half to the tune of a 20.5 point differential with a couple of home wins, they just mantled Indiana the other night to account for a significant chunk of that differential. So, yeah, that's going to be fun. The top two teams right now in the West, Denver 5-1, Warriors 5-1. Both these teams have a couple of more games before they play each other on Wednesday. But that's going to be a fun one from Denver on Wednesday night to be sure. And those championship teams, they go one of two ways coming off of that title. There's either the hangover, or they come back as a team that maybe wasn't expected to win a title, and they're more connected and everything seems to fit together better. I thought we saw the Warriors do that in the 15-16 year when they ran off 24 in a row. And there was hey, we're going to validate the title that we just won to everybody in the league that thought it was some kind of fluke by winning 24 straight games to start the year in 73 throughout the course of that regular season. I'm not saying Denver's going to be that, but some teams, there's a weight lifted when they win a title, and they come back much more relaxed and calm and confident in their own abilities now, knowing that they can get the job done. And I think we've seen that so far in the early part of the season with Denver. All right, 888-957-9570. We are going to hear the Steve Kerr response to Draymond's comments. That's coming up, but I want to get to Skills on the phone lines here. What's going on, Skills? Skills, you out in Vallejo today? Where you at, my man?
Hey, John. Good morning. Good morning, Dan. Good to be on with you again. I am holding down Vallejo as best as I possibly can.
Awesome. Love it. Good to hear.
Hey, when you accidentally called that last caller Skills before the break, man, I was feeling some Twilight Zone stuff going on. I didn't know what was happening. I'm glad we got that straightened up. But the reason I called, and hopefully no one else has brought this up, what I'm about to say, because you guys were kind of touching on it before the break too. A few years ago, when DeMarcus Cousins, I think he was still on the Kings, but he might have been on the Pelicans by then, one of his teammates got in a skirmish with someone else, and Cousins, of all people, had to kind of round him up and calm him down and be the voice of reason. And everyone on Twitter and blah, blah, blah was like, it's bad, but DeMarcus Cousins has to be the voice of reason. And that kind of brings me to my point with Chris Paul and the Warriors. And I'll preface this by saying I've never met Chris Paul, or at least if I have, I don't remember it. But I've heard everything I've heard about him. He's not the guy in the insurance hats. He's moody. He's kind of two-faced. He's kind of like not very nice guy overall, period. Because even this broadcaster last year with the Suns had little good to say about him after he left. So, but now I'm hearing that he's helped the Warriors' chemistry. He's helped organize all these dinners and workouts and all this stuff. And what I want to know from you guys, because you're obviously close to the things that I am, have you ever dealt with him? And was it really that awful in Golden State where a guy like Paul with 1 foot in retirement, with his reputation, coming off the bench is going to be an upgrade in the locker room? Thank you.
Well, I think he has been an upgrade in the locker room. I don't have a lot of personal interactions with Chris Paul during his career. If anything, it was more the early part of his career when I was still working at Sacramento, when I was more regularly in visiting locker rooms as part of my job going back. We're going back 15-plus years. At this point, 13 to 16 plus years. So that was the early part of his career. But look, I think the one thing, Dan, is I think Chris Paul is just a different personality. Like, he's a serious guy. I think he's kind of a no-nonsense guy. I think he is a can be a little bit prickly in terms of his personality. But the one thing I will say, and this is the part where I think, Chris Paul is like, from a basketball standpoint, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson. He's on that level in terms of acumen and the things that he's done, the pellets on the wall, all of those different things. Like Chris Paul is on that level of future Hall of Famer. Doesn't have the championships. Some of the antics I know rub people the wrong way. Not denying any of that. But I think the reason that this thing has worked is because Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green have welcomed him in, and they've welcomed him in because they respect the hell out of what he's done, and I think have respected him on the basically saying, hey, dude, we know you're on our level even though you don't have the championships. And I think that's a difference between how players view other greats and how fans view other greats as somebody that was just a villain and a rival. And, man, I hate that dude because he was always mixing it up with our players.
Yeah, and I don't think he would be with the Golden State Warriors unless the Warriors staff as well as the players signed off on the guy. And I've never had an issue with Chris Paul. I think what Chris Paul and sort of the problems he found, especially early on in his career and when he was in L.A., is that, and this is part of the reason why it's a fit with Golden State, is that he is an ultimate competitor. And unlike that of a Steph Curry, maybe he doesn't necessarily handle it well because he will let you know if you're a player on the court that you're out of position. Sometimes that carries over into the locker room. But he's not a James Harden. He's not a Kyrie Irving. He's not holding teams at hostage. When you say he doesn't get along with other players or he's disruptive, more often than not, when it comes to Chris Paul, is because you're not doing it the right way. Now, you can be tactful in the way you handle that with teammates, which oftentimes he is not. But I think at the core, he is finally in his career, and we'll see how it plays out, but he's now with a room full of guys who think along the same lines, that this is about winning and doing it the right way and making sure that you have that competitive element, because if you don't, I'm the sort of guy that can call you out. And because of that, I think it's gotten him trouble in the past.
No, and look, Chris Paul is a winner. Like, that's just reality. And I know, again, I think in the landscape of fans and how we talk about sports, sometimes we talk, and this is unfair, and I try not to do this, but generally speaking, I think many in the media, especially in this particular job, we tend to talk about people who have not won championships as if they're losers. And that's wholly unfair. And I think Chris Paul is the prime example of a guy that just because you haven't won a championship doesn't mean you're not doesn't mean you're a loser. Chris Paul in many ways is the ultimate winner, and I think Steph and Klay and Draymond and Steve Kerr acknowledge that and understand that. And the other thing is, Chris Paul's always been good on the court in terms of leadership with younger players. That has been something that he has been praised about, and so. I think that, and that's something that, you look at, he's going to lead the bench unit. He's willing to come off the bench, which is something that we didn't think was going to necessarily be possible. And he's helping a group of veterans and young players thrive playing alongside him as a five-man group to the point where they're outscoring teams 57-37 last night. All right, let's keep it moving on the phones. Got a couple more calls, and then I do want to get to those Steve Kerr comments as well to kind of tie a bow on the response to what Draymond had to say. Mark in San Francisco is next here on Warriors This Week. Hey, Mark.
Hey, gentlemen. There's two front offices that I think have done a great job, Boston and Mike Dunleavy. Mike Dunleavy's done a great job of putting this team together. Yeah, he has.
Good point.
And there's no doubt. And I think we're going to continue to look more closely at those things as this season goes on. If this Warriors team wins 50, 55 games, then the fresh eyes and the Mike Dunleavy obviously was here under Bob Myers, but the willingness to maybe tackle things a different way is something that's going to be recognized as a tremendous positive. Don in Sunnyvale. Hey, Don, appreciate you calling back. I know we had you just about ready to roll earlier on in the show. How are you this morning?
Good, thanks. Hey, a couple things. The Draymond comments after the Kings game. I mean, to me, that's like, burning the dinner and just complaining about how awful it tastes later. But one other thing related to that with Poole, earlier in the show, you guys were talking about how, after the championship, Poole was a different guy, his attitude, thinking he belonged with the core. But, I mean, it seems like we seem to overlook the fact that the Warriors paid him. We paid him like he belonged.
I think it's a fair point. Go ahead, Don. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, so, I mean, it just sounds like, I know it's easy to kick someone when they're gone, but everyone's putting it all on Poole and the way he acted and all this stuff. But we contributed to that, right? We rewarded him for a very small amount of, time on the floor compared to the core, right? I think we as an organization fostered that behavior. How could you not?
I think it's a fair point, Don. I think it's a good point. I think they rewarded him, though, in part because he earned it by the way that he played that year. And so often, Dan, timing dictates these things. He was up for a contract extension, and he played at the level to where when you start comparing it to other players in his draft class and the numbers that he was putting up, it was clear by November he was going to be an $80 million player. It was clear by January it was going to be over 100. And by the time they won the championship, it was all the way when you looked at Tyler Hero and everybody, it was going to be pushing 120 and ultimately got to 120. And so, when that season started 2 years ago, I think they were probably thinking, oh, all right, maybe it's going to be 75 or 80. Maybe it's going to be 65 to 70. Well, it winds up being significantly more than that, but they paid him as a reward. And I get where Don's coming from. But like, what are you supposed to do? Are you going to not pay him? You're going to have a miserable player at that point, given what he brought to the table. And so I think you do have to reward your players who contribute, and I think they did that at an appropriate time.
He had all the leverage, and that's oftentimes what these things come down to. I think in defense of the Golden State Warriors is that you had to pay him market value, and you had to pay him. But the one thing, and we alluded to this earlier, is that while you pay him, he still had not defined himself, because there's a level of risk in all of these things, drafting players and paying a young player like that, of Jordan Poole. And the risk being is he going to maintain the same pace? And also, what sort of player is he going to develop into as far as a person? Is he going to be a leader? Is he going to show a level of maturity? What sort of person is he going to be? We really don't know. We can sort of surmise, but there's a level of risk. And as it turns out, as we have, we've talked ad nauseum about this, is that there was a level of immaturity that I don't think in retrospect, had they known, and I'm not blaming the punch on Jordan Poole, but there was a level of immaturity that I don't think that they factored into things when they gave him that huge contract. Maybe not,
But at the same time, I don't think they had a choice but to pay him.
Yeah.
Like based on again, coming back to the timing.
He had all the leverage.
The fact that he was due. Like, are you going to say, you know what, Jordan, we're not going to give you an extension. We're going to let you play it out on the final year of your deal, and then you know what? Because they could have said, hey, we're going to make another team make you an offer, and then we'll just match the offer, and then the offer will dictate exactly what your number is going to be. They could have played it that way. I mean, I don't want to act like there was nothing that they could have done, but coming off of a title and coming off of him being such a significant contributor, and I think the thought was, hey, we've got a guy. I think the Warriors believe they have a guy that could fill in for Steph Curry when Curry was out and fill in admirably for Klay Thompson in the games Klay Thompson was going to miss. And let's not underestimate the fact that the whole punch incident did, I think, change the calculus on everything, even if Jordan Poole maybe came back into the Warriors training camp that year with a different mindset as a dude that had won an NBA title and knew hadn't quite been paid yet, but knew he was going to get paid in a large way. I do want to play a couple of these cuts before we call it a morning, and it's been a great show this morning. Dan, really appreciate you. I think you're going to be back in next week as well on this show and for a good chunk of these shows this season. So really looking forward to that as we get things rolling here on the NBA season. But Steve Kerr, he joined Willard and Dibbs on Thursday, and he was asked a couple of questions about what Draymond had to say. We played Draymond's cuts earlier after the Kings game. And here was Steve Kerr on what Draymond said about the chemistry being bad. All right, positive and appropriate spin, I guess, put on that. But if Draymond's doing the work, that's the most important component, Dan.
Yeah, I also heard between the lines there with Steve Kerr is that just to go back a year ago, we have to remind ourselves what took place, and that is that Steve Kerr and the Warriors took a lot of heat that they didn't really penalize Draymond Green. Or the penalty was pretty light considering what it is that he did. And I think that Steve Kerr is well aware of that. So now that this is played out in favor of the Golden State Warriors, in retrospect, I don't think that Steve Kerr, when he thinks about the punch and where we're at right now and the comments by that of Draymond Green, that he advocates what it is that Draymond did a year ago. We didn't penalize him, and here we sit today, a better team without Jordan Poole. I think and it could just be me, that he's a little sensitive and he's a little conscious at all times of what it is that he did and its behavior that he certainly doesn't want to condone going forward.
Let's hear a little bit more from Steve Kerr. I think that's a good point. He was asked, and I think this is a fair question, if he's worried about the fact that Draymond is still talking about it. We debated that earlier. Here's the head coach. So there you go. Not worried about it. I think that plays to what you just said about, making sure that, you're thinking about what just where Draymond's at. You just kind of let Draymond be. You just kind of let Draymond be Draymond. And you hope that at the end of the day, the positives outweigh the negatives.
What are you going to do with Draymond? This has to run its course with Draymond. When Draymond's done talking about the chemistry and the subtle or indirect or the lack of the subtleties as far as taking shots at Jordan Poole, it's only when Draymond feels as though he can put that down and move on. Draymond is, he is who he is. I think that again, you don't need Draymond or anyone else to draw attention to how much better this team is. From a chemistry standpoint, we can all put 2 and 2 together. So let us figure it out. And Draymond, you can. We understand. And so I don't think we need to hear from him any longer about what it is that should be pretty obvious to everybody that's a Warrior fan when you contrast last year to this year.
Final cut here, and I think this is the most pertinent one because Steve Kerr was asked about Jordan Poole and the Jordan Poole component, and here's what he had to say as far as hinting that maybe Jordan Poole as we discussed in this very radio station on Thursday, is a big part of the reason why things are different.
It's trash.
So there you go. Steve Kerr taking the high road again, I think trying to tamp down some of the potential future back and forth that could be coming on that. And I think that's a very reasonable way to look at it. He helped him. He was part of the problem. I don't think he completely, and I get Steve Kerr not saying that. Jordan Poole was part of the problem. I don't think there's much doubt. Maybe more from a basketball on the court standpoint than the other stuff, just in terms of the way he was playing. But Coach Kerr tried to take the high road and I think move on, Dan. Final thought before we call it a morning.
Yeah, it's dominated the conversation here today, but I think it's time to move on. I think it's going to be fun when he comes to town. We could have, Westbrook, Durant, Warriors versus OKC again, because I don't think, knowing the personality of these two, there's the potential for this to fester, and we haven't heard from Jordan Poole, but we might at some point.
All right, he's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. Great stuff this morning, Dan. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week. Thanks to Craig Valentino as well for running the show, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. I will, 2 o'clock, Warriors Live, Dubs, and the Cavs, and then we'll be back next week with Warriors This Week, 9 a.m. right here on 95.7 The Game. For Devone, I'm JD. Keep it locked right here on 95.7 The Game.
So what are you reading?
I'm checking out the ratings on the new TVs, and it looks like Samsung, LG, and Sony got the best scores.
Just like last year. What about those new high dynamic range TVs?